Good evening, and thanks for everyone showing up. It started raining cats and dogs here at about 5:30, and I thought that might dissuade some of you, but I know the topic is so great and exciting that we're really looking forward to it, and so thank you. So with that, we will start off. If everybody could stand, and Robert, would you please, invocation, please?
Lord, most gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity to gather here tonight as descendants of patriots of the Revolutionary War. We thank you for the safe travels too, and hope for the best safe travels home. Please bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies and rest of our souls. Yes, in thy name, amen.
Eric, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And next on your program is our SIR pledge, and if you're not a member, please still join along. It's some good words of wisdom. Mr. Woody, would you please lead that?
We,
Descendants of the heroes of the American Revolution, who by their sacrifices established the United States of America, reaffirm our faith in the principles of liberty and our constitutional republic, and solemnly pledge ourselves to defend them against every foe.
And I would, you may be seated, but I would say that if you're not a member, you probably have a patriot ancestor. The probability is high that you've been here for a while. So we will look into that. So just let us know. Next, just a little bit of business and everything, but I would like Eric to come up, and I would like to hand him we attended the 245th Battle of Rensselaer's Mill. So this will go on our SAR flag. So you can take care of that.
and please come out this weekend. So it will.
Yeah, so there is a living history in Rancher's Mill, which is Lincolnton for those, and it starts at
10 o'clock. Saturday morning.
10 a.m. on Saturday. So we'll come down, so I'd like to be dressed up and join them. That's it.
It's gonna be a nice cool day. Come join us.
Yeah. Next, I would like to ask Chuck Shear and Tom Lesser if you could come up and help me. We've got a few new members. They always love the spotlight. So we have 2 of the 3 that were able to make it. So if I could ask Mike Carpenter and Brian Lindsay, our newest members, to come forward. We have a very brief little ceremony, and I do have to swear you in to make it official, of course. So, but Brian, if you can, yeah. But I'll stay here. Okay, so I can at least see you all. But I would like to welcome you as the 2 newest members of Colonel Alexander Erwin Chapter, so we're very excited. So I would like to induct you, so Michael Carpenter and Brian Lindsay. If the answers will be I do, or sorry about that. Do you all, as a descendant of one of the patriots and the heroes of the American Revolution, reaffirm your ancestors' faith in the principles of liberty and our constitutional republic? Will you pledge to actively support the National Society, Sons of the American Revolution, the North Carolina Society, and the Colonel Alexander Erwin Chapter? That one has hooks. I'm just kidding. I now take the great pleasure in having Chuck and Tom presenting your membership certificates to each of you. And then I would also like you to hand them, it's a little bag, but there's 4 items in it. It's the SAR rosette, lapel for your coat, a miniature SAR membership badge, America 250th pin reminder to spread the word, because all of the 250th anniversaries have started, one recently. And also there's 2 Colonel Alexander Erwin SAR challenge coins in there. So I would like to just tell you a little bit about them for those that don't know about this. The rosette is the official recognition emblem of the Sons of the American Revolution. Its blue and buff colors represent the colors in the uniform worn by General George Washington. Should have this memorized after all these ceremonies. The SAR badge consists of the Maltese cross bearing a profiled bust of General George Washington. Surrounding the bust is a blue enameled ribbon containing the motto, Liberty and Patriotism. A laurel wreath encircles the medallion. The cross is surmounted on a golden eagle and suspended from a ribbon of the Society's colors, blue, buff yellow, and white. The 2 challenge coins are, one is for you, and one is for you to help us spread the word to a worthy SAR candidate that you believe would serve our mission well as an invitation to this great group of compatriots. Compatriot, we now welcome you to the chapter, and we ask that you work with us to fulfill the purpose and objectives of the Sons of the American Revolution. So at this time, I would like to invite you to briefly address the crowd if you wish.
Only my mom called me Michael, so it is Mike. My ancestor was Christian Z. Carpenter. He's buried in the very southern part of what's now Lincoln County. That's all I got for today.
I've known for many years that I was linked to the American Revolution because there's a small family cemetery near Martinsville, Virginia, in Leatherwood, which is shared by Bonnaroots and by General Martin. And I had not known until Tom told me what the connection was, you know, that we had with the general. And he found the connecting person, his name is Arthur Slayton, and he is from Goochland County, just outside of Richmond. I still don't know exactly how the connection was made, although I know the people, I know how you did the connection. I don't know the particulars of how all that connection was done, going back to where the Bonnaroots and General Martin were in the same small cemetery there at Leatherwood. But I'm very grateful to have found that out, and I'm very, very grateful to be a part of this particular SAR unit. So thank you very much, you know, for allowing me to be one of you at this point. Thank you.
Once again, it's the monthly shameless plug for our organization. Any of you, we have several positions still available. Mike's new, and he's going to start jumping in for us on the application process as the assistant registrar here once we get rolling. We've got a lot of positions, and also, if you're a member, not that Tom wants any more work, but you probably have more than one patriot. You might not know that, but there's a good chance if you have one, you have another. And by all means, fill a supplemental out. Let's look, you know, or if you just want us to look for you, we'll do it.
Thank you.
All right, everybody up here?
So, yeah, everybody could.
Look at all the faces. There we go.
Thank you, and
Hard to get
congratulations.
by, yeah, look straight.
So just one brief announcement. I believe they're pretty close to having our food ready, but I always try to come up with some Revolutionary War era display. So tonight, since we're talking about the Mecklenburg Declaration, which was before 1776, I believe, I decided to bring, there's 4 swords here that date anywhere from about 1620 up to about 1750. Really, they're all English descent or whatever. So when you stop and think about it, a lot of people, if they had weapons, were probably their fathers, their grandfathers, or in excess. So anyhow, I did bring these up. I would say 3 of them are still extremely sharp after 250 years, so prefer you not to handle those. But of interest anyway. Well, with that, we will start through the food line. I would like to ask this table to go first, and then kind of start working from this side over, and we will get about everyone into their dessert phase, and then we will begin the presentation. So, please.
Mecklenburg County on May the 20th of this year happened to be the 250th anniversary of the reading of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. I want this group to be so proud of Kevin, because when we got there, the person that was in charge said, you know, we've got a problem. We don't really have anybody picked out to lead the color guard. And Kevin modestly stepped forward and said, well, I've been doing this for some time now. Said, you're appointed. So the person that ran the color guard for 1,000 people in front of 1,000 people was Kevin. And Becca Heacock and I played a couple that had gone inside, got to go inside the restricted area where the makeshift courthouse was on the corner of Trade and Tryon, and hear the Declaration be read out by Thomas Polk, I do believe. And then we went to his grave and marching in the heat, and I was also in the color guard. Based upon my own research of my own family, there is little doubt in my mind that my patriot was in that crowd. He did not sign the Declaration, and I'm 100% sure that 5 years later, he was in that courthouse in defiance of the Crown, giving testimony at a trial when somebody ran in and said, get out, go home, Cornwallis is approaching Charlotte. And so that's my story there. So the Mecklenburg Declaration is being celebrated with 1,000 people, and yet what you need to know is that there are people, learned, educated people, that believes the entire thing was a hoax, and it did not happen. One of the people that doubted its authenticity was none other than Thomas Jefferson, and I'm sure that that will be part of our story tonight. We are very lucky, because if you want to know anything about the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, I am absolutely convinced that the man that's about to speak to you knows more about it than anybody alive on this planet. Scott Syfert is a partner at the Van Allen Law Firm in Charlotte. He founded the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence Society. He has written a book that has caught the attention of none other than Ken Burns, who said he brings vividly to life a little-known story of the Revolutionary War. And British military historian said this is one of the finest pieces of historical detective work that I have ever seen. This is one of the great historical tales of intrigue in our country, and it's why it's so much fun to live here. I introduce to you Scott Syfert.
Doctor, thanks for having me up here, and Kevin. Where's Kevin? Thanks, Kevin, for letting me got to make this work. We tried to do this in February, but we got hit with an ice storm. So it's a lot better to drive up here from Charlotte in June, I'll tell you that. Well, I'm delighted to be here. We had, as John was saying, we did the 250th MECDEC commemorations last month, and we had pushing 1,000 people on the square on May 20th, right in downtown Charlotte, which is in excess of probably 5 to 10 times the amount we normally get. And we spent about a year building up to that event with 3 beer launches, 30 speeches and so forth. So starting basically in February, I think I've done 35 either events or beer lunches or things like that in Charlotte. And this, as it happens, is the last of the cycle. So, but it looks like it might be one of the best ones. So we've had a very attentive and informed crowd. So let me tell you a little about the MECDEC story and how I got involved with this. So going back about 15 years ago, a buddy of mine is telling me the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence story in a bar in Charlotte. And I remember thinking, or even telling him, you're making this whole thing up. I've never heard this in my life. And he said, no, it's true. Mecklenburg County declared independence. It's the date on the North Carolina state flag for that reason, May 20th, 1775. It had been a city and county holiday in Charlotte until 1982 or so. And so forth. And I'm like, how have I never heard of this? I've grown up in Charlotte, I've gone through the public school system, and I'd probably been taught this at some point, surely, but I had no recollection of it. And so we just thought, we said, look, this is a great story, we should do something with this. So we started this group called the May 20th Society, and it was really kind of a young professionals networking group, frankly. Because we were all just Charlotte people, we thought it was kind of cool. It didn't seem like much was going on with this, and we liked it. So we got a group of sort of folks together, some were in real estate, I'm in law, but none of us were historians, no one was really involved with historical stuff at all. We were just kind of, we were enthusiasts for this without really. And so we had a party. And we had about 250 people show up for our first party. And we said, we're onto something here. So we started this group called the May 20th Society, just for purposes of bringing back the commemoration in May around the MECDEC story. And we hit a moment in time, for whatever reason, that we had a lot of enthusiasm. So what we started with was, let's bring national historians to Charlotte and donate them to the school system to talk to the kids. So we did that for about 10 years, and we would bring Ken Burns, David McCullough, Cokie Roberts, Jeff Shara, Lord Andrew Roberts, Isabel Wilkerson, I'm forgetting some others, but the marquee list of American and world historians, until we sort of brought all the historians, we're like, what do we do next? So we got some funding, and we were approached by an organization called the Trail of History, which erects bronze statues along the Greenway in downtown Charlotte near Central Piedmont Community College. And we helped them fundraise for the first statue that was put up in 2012 of Captain Jack. And this is Captain Jack. This group knows, no, this is not Paul Revere. This is Captain Jack turning to ride north. I should tell you, we now have 11 subsequent statues with 3 more in various phases of development. It's for 14 currently. We did Uptown Charlotte, we did the Charlotte Liberty Walk, which is a revolutionary walking tour model on the Freedom Trail in Boston. We have a website, we have a pamphlet you can, we're promoted by the Tourism Board for revolutionary walking sites. All the original sites, of course, are gone, right? So you have to imagine these or sort of recreate them in your mind or look at them on the website, because they're sort of places surrounded by these huge buildings now. But everything, other than Settler Cemetery, there's nothing left of the sort of original pieces, and that's just life. And then, of course, we did the Captain Jack Pilsner beer with OMB, which is, as I say, our most important and long-standing legacy, probably. And we did 3 beer launches in the last 2 months from different breweries of MECDEC themed beer. So while this was going on, for 10 years or so, I became, for whatever reason, the regimental historian of the group. So if we had to go talk to the media or write content for the website or whatever it was, or do interviews, I just ended up doing all the research, and I found this story very intriguing. Again, I started from the perspective of knowing nothing about this at all. But as the years went by, I suddenly looked up one day and realized I was the world's leading expert on this obscure historical episode, and I needed to write it all down before I get hit by a bus and it was all gone. And it's a complicated story. It covers a lot of different things, as we'll touch on. We've got papers that are sort of burned and missing, or undated or anonymous. You have the Scottish Presbyterian influence behind this whole story. The Covenanting Presbyterians we were talking about earlier, who play a huge role in this. Like, how could this have happened? If this is true, would it have happened here versus somewhere else? How does that lend itself to the story? You've got the celebrations that occur for 200 years that mean something. You've got the Jefferson Adams debates and so forth. So it's a complicated story, so it took a lot of time to sort of figure out how to tell it in a coherent way. The basic story, which most of you probably know fairly well, is on April 19th, 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord occur. A month later, a rider from the north arrives in Mecklenburg County, and he brings word to the citizens there that these battles had just occurred exactly 1 month before. They happen to be meeting in the log courthouse in St. Louis, now Trade Tryon Street, downtown Charlotte. 26 Scots-Irish Presbyterian militia leaders with names you're all familiar with, I suspect, including white slavery. And they go ballistic upon hearing this news. And as the story goes, over the course of the next 24 hours, they debate a series of resolutions in which they declare themselves free and independent of Great Britain. And at noon on the 20th, as you see here, you have Thomas Polk reading the Declaration from the courthouse steps to the assembled citizens, and they throw their hats in the air, and many are stuck on the courthouse top. John Alexander, who is a principal character in the story, in his notes many years later says, when they received the news, he said, "We smelt and felt the blood and carnage of Lexington, which raised all our passions into fury and revenge," which would explain what happened. They then say, well, what do we do now? Right? We're a handful of people living here in the woods. It's not a major city. It's not Charleston. It's not Boston or Philadelphia. It's an obscure frontier outpost with about 20 log cabins, village huts. And they said, we got an idea. Let's send a messenger to deliver these papers to the Second Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia that summer. And so they do. They find a local tavern owner named Captain James Jack, and they give him the Mecklenburg papers and send him to Philadelphia and say, deliver these to Congress and have them tell us what to do next. But we in Mecklenburg have declared independence, and that's what it is. And so you see Jack here riding north. You see the courthouse behind him with the people waving and so forth. This painting, by the way, is by an artist who lives in Charlotte named Chaz Fagan, who's internationally known. He also is the sculptor for the Captain Jack statue that you saw earlier. He's also Mother Teresa's official portrait artist, a couple of things. And he, 2 weeks ago, you may have seen the White House unveiled a official postage stamp of Barbara Bush, and he painted that. He's also the Bush family official portrait artist. He's a very interesting guy and a huge enthusiast of this story as well. Back to the Mecklenburg story. So meanwhile, the British are aware of things going on in Mecklenburg. This is the last royal governor of North Carolina, Josiah Martin. And in June of that summer, he writes a letter to his superiors in London, in which he says, the resolves of a committee in Mecklenburg, which your lordship will find in this enclosed newspaper, surpass all the horrid and treasonable publications that the inflammatory spirits of this continent have yet produced. This is Josiah Martin. He also says, we understand that the express riders have been sent to Philadelphia with these papers, and rest assured, once we recover authority, we will find him and deal with him. So there's many of these letters floating back and forth through this period from the British records, talking about something going on in Mecklenburg. The war then, for 2 years, really kind of is a phony war in the South, as I'm sure many of you know, until Cornwallis and Sir Henry Clinton land in Charleston in the spring of 1780, and the war is brought to the South. And from that point, the Southern campaigns began to go on for about 2 years, and the area, including this area, is completely devastated. The British march through Charlotte, all the inhabitants flee, taking with them everything they could carry to get out of town. It's laid waste. You see here, this is a portrait by another artist in Charlotte. It was Dan Nance. This is the Battle of Charlotte, where the green-jacketed British Legion rides in and is ambushed from behind log courthouse and also from various outbuildings, and repelled 3 times until Cornwallis comes out and basically yells at them and says, this is embarrassing, you're facing 100 militia, we have 2,000 soldiers. So they pushed them eventually out of town. This was led by, I'm sure you know, Joseph Graham was in charge here. But in any event, the Mecklenburg story in the sort of ruined landscape of North Carolina would have been lost and forgotten, and no one had probably ever heard of it, frankly. But for a series of events that occur after the Revolutionary War. So about the period 1818, 1819, many states are saying, who gets credit for the American Revolution? And the people of Massachusetts say, it's a Massachusetts story. It's St. Adams, it's the Boston Tea Party, it's the Coercion Acts, it's a Massachusetts story. And the Virginia people say, no. It's a Thomas Jefferson story. We get credit for the American Revolution. Virginia is Guilford Courthouse, it's Yorktown, it's really a Virginia story. And the people in North Carolina said, well, you may not have heard of this, but actually we had a Declaration of Independence in May of 1775. And in fact, we've got some papers we found that attest to this. And they find this paper, and this is original copy. It's in Wilson Library in Chapel Hill, and it is a written account of the Mecklenburg story, soup to nuts. And you can see here, it's perfectly legible. It is undated. It is also unknown who wrote it and exactly when, so it's called a copy in a hand unknown. But nevertheless, the people of Mecklenburg County find it and they publish it in the Raleigh Register. And they say, it's clearly authentic. We don't know who wrote it, but it doesn't matter. Everyone in this area knows the story anyway. The participants, Waits to Lavery, Joseph Graham, and so far are all reliable people, so we're not making this up. So it gets published, and that paper finds its way to retired President John Adams, who's living in Quincy, Massachusetts. And Adams, reading the Mecklenburg story in the paper, has a series of astonishing reactions. But the first is, he says, the genuine sense of America at that moment was never expressed so well before nor since. And he writes this to Thomas Jefferson, which he is, as I say, was basically a frenemy of his at the time. They didn't really like each other anymore. So he writes a kind of terse, testy, snarky letter to Jefferson, in which he sort of intimates that the genuine sense was never expressed so well before. Well, what does that mean? I mean, Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, right? So is it better than my declaration? So Jefferson gets this letter on the 4th of July, as it happens, and he's not impressed. Meanwhile, Adams is privately writing to his other friends, accusing Jefferson of plagiarism. And this is one of the letters he writes to Reverend William Bentley. He says, Mr. Jefferson must have seen it in the time of it, for he's copied the spirit, the sense, and the expressions of it verbatim. So there's several letters like this from Adams. And who knows Jefferson better than Adams? And Adams' instinctive first response is, Jefferson is a plagiarist. He must have seen this, and he hid it, or he obscured it, or he covered it up. So Adams sets off an entire maelstrom when these letters are finally published. You become a Jeffersonian person or an Adams person. So Jefferson, meanwhile, is not impressed with Adams' accusations, let's say. And he writes a lengthy, very thoughtful 4 or 5 page letter in response to Adams. And this is an actual copy from Monticello. And the punchline of Jefferson's arguments is, you seem to think it's genuine, I believe it's spurious. And he goes through the whole list of why he doesn't believe it, which is that no historians have written about it. It wasn't nationally published. I'd never heard of this before, neither did you. None of the congressional delegates ever mentioned it to me. He didn't entirely foreclose the possibility that it was real, however. He said, you cannot prove a negative. So until more solid proof is produced in favor of the story, Jefferson says, I must remain a disbeliever in the apocryphal gospel. And so that's where it kind of stood. So these letters then set off a huge debate called the Mecklenburg controversy in the mid-19th century. And you're either with the Jeffersonian people, and you say these people in North Carolina have created this hoax story to claim credit, but they don't deserve it, and they accuse Jefferson of plagiarism is absurd. Or you're with the Adams people, and you say, hey, explain to me how these documents look so similar. And so people are writing articles, books are written with all sorts of titles like The Mecklenburg Story, A Total Hoax, or on the other side, The Mecklenburg Declaration Comprehensively Proved. And I wouldn't recommend you read any of those books. I did it for you, so you don't have to. But they're not great reads. But all of these books are republished, and historians are traveling to London to look for evidence and so forth. And it sort of excites the whole country. So in 1831, the North Carolina governor says, right, we're settling this thing once and for all. So he appoints a committee to look at this subject and write a report for him. And they do. And he goes, they go back and they find many of the eyewitnesses, including Captain Jack, including Joseph Graham, and they get sworn affidavits from these folks about the Mecklenburg story that they heard and seen. And some are 4 paragraphs long, and some are 5 or 6 pages, and they're all very detailed. And the people giving these accounts aren't just random people off the street, right? They are Revolutionary veterans, they are Presbyterian ministers, they are sort of the elite of the community. So it's a very believable report, and it all sort of makes the same argument that on May 19th, May 20th, we had a meeting and we declared independence, and that's what happened. And so the governor's report really should have settled the whole thing in favor of the pro-Mecklenburg people, let's say, once and for all. But as the historians are looking for other documents in the archives and so forth, they find this. And this is the South Carolina Gazette and Country Journal from June 13th of 1775. This is an actual copy in the Charleston Library on King Street, which you can go see to this day. And it's a series of resolutions, as you can see, from Charlottetown, Mecklenburg County, dated May 31st, 1775. Well, what are these? So no one knows. So first of all, they aren't dated the same date as what all the eyewitnesses said the Mecklenburg is. So all the eyewitnesses are more or less was May 19th, May 20th. These are dated 11 days later. These resolves, they're called, the Mecklenburg resolves, to differentiate them from the Mecklenburg, are also 20 in length. And they don't look or read or sound like what the eyewitnesses all say the Mecklenburg is. They say things like, now that we are independent, court meets every other month, we're putting gunpowder at John's house, and things like this. So they're very it reads like the bylaws. So, but they're clearly authentic, right? They exist. No one disputes them, can't dispute them to this day. But the discovery of the resolves in 1838 has the effect on the debate, the controversy of, if you are a skeptic, if you're a Jeffersonian, if you're a hater of the story, of which North Carolina had plenty too, by the way, if you don't like the story and you disbelieve the whole Mecklenburg story for whatever reason, this becomes the hammer to try to beat the story to death. And the argument is, this is all that happened. So on May 31st, there was a meeting, they produced these, and all of your very credible eyewitnesses are misremembering a real event, the publication and passing of these results, which are interesting, but are not a Declaration of Independence on their face. They're misremembering and conflating that real event with a fictitious event on May 20th where they declared independence. And they're giving their accounts and their testimony 50-something years later, and so they're all sort of confused. So they're not lying. We can't use Joseph Graham lying, but they're all confused. So that becomes the anti-argument, which is the anti-argument to this day. If you are a believer in the story, you say, no. This is collateral evidence of the whole thing, right? So on May 20th, there's a Declaration of Independence, or there's a Mecklenburg, and 11 days later, this is them setting up a government. We don't and will not have an original copy of the Mecklenburg because those papers were lost in a fire in April of 1800. So we can't produce that, fair enough, but we got eyewitnesses, we got all this other stuff. So this is evidence that the whole story is true. And again, that's pretty much where the argument lies to this very day. If you get to engage an academic historian, pro or con, this is sort of, that's nothing evidentiary-wise has really changed since this. And that's the Mecklenburg controversy in a nutshell. Meanwhile, in Mecklenburg County, they didn't care. They said, we're going to celebrate this anyway. So for 200 years, starting actually in 1803, if you believe it, there were May 20th commemorations every year. And they sort of, especially in the 19th century, grew in size. The date was put on the state flag, where it remains to this day. It's on the state seal, as you can see at the top. Sitting American presidents would come to Charlotte for various events. We had Taft in 1909. Sitting to his left is Anna Morrison Jackson, the widow of Stonewall Jackson, who later in life resided in Charlotte. We had Woodrow Wilson in 1916, Eisenhower in 1953, and Gerald Ford in 1975. So this was including all sorts of other people too. These are sort of the sitting presidents, but many other, Teddy Roosevelt was here, Lady Bird Johnson, and so forth, for these McDeck commemorations. It was the biggest, or one of the biggest celebrations in the state of North Carolina. We didn't celebrate Memorial Day because that was a post-Civil War Yankee holiday, right? So you celebrated McDeck Day, and that's what you did. In the 1980 or so, it's kind of just a rough date, but this whole sort of celebration and story just kind of fizzles out for a variety of reasons. One, you have so many transplants to the area coming from Ohio, New York, wherever, who have no understanding or knowledge of the story. You also, it just kind of didn't fit the ethos of the period either. Charlotte decided it was going to be a big city and knock down every building and get away from the baggage of Southern history and be a big shiny financial services place. One can debate if that's a good strategy or not, but that's what they did. And consequently, it's a confusing story. There's some controversy. It's old white guys arguing about papers. Like, what is this? So the whole thing just kind of lost its mojo. And I remember walking down the main street on May 20th, let's call it 1998 or so, and there was one gentleman there reading the McDeck in a period costume, and that was it. And a friend of mine was like, what's going on with this thing? And what is this? And people, lawyers and bankers and so forth, walking past and forth. And that's kind of where it just was. So we took it upon ourselves to sort of bring it back because we thought it was fun, and I think we've been pretty successful on that. Let's see what else. So conclusion, and we can get into some of the evidentiary stuff with questions I think we can answer. Conclusion is there is a great, or Occam's razor, we were talking about earlier, it's like what really happened? I think the answer is there's too much smoke for there to be no fire around events in Mecklenburg and Lake Bay, right? You have 13 eyewitnesses giving you the same testimony. You have the British writing about something and calling these horrid and treasonable publications. Well, what were they looking at, right? And reporting this back to the British government, by the way. So it was important enough to do that. They sent Captain Jack to Philadelphia, which no one claims didn't happen, right? There's eyewitness testimony of him being there. Well, why would they do that? Why would they send him there if nothing was going on? So we're really at this point just having a debate or argument about what did the text of whatever these papers were say? And that argument will never be conclusively resolved to everyone's satisfaction because we can never produce the papers. Now there are papers, but as I say, they're sort of ripped in half, they're undated, they're anonymous, it's not clear who wrote them, you can't trace the provenance of these documents to everyone's satisfaction. But the McDeck, in whatever it was, probably looked like what everyone said it looked like. That's the logical conclusion, and it probably looked and read like the papers that exist. The fact you can't put your fingers on an original copy, in my view, does not negate the story any more than a dozen other stories from this part of the war. From the Revolutionary period, where you have papers lost, you have eyewitnesses that are gone, you have eyewitnesses who die. Just reading the history of South Carolina in the Revolutionary War, and I think there's 173 battles or skirmishes in the state of South Carolina in 2 years, but there may be twice as many that are just never recorded, that no one wrote down or no one knows anything about. And that's just the nature of history in this period. So that is, I think that's that. So that's the McDeck story in a nutshell. We can, I'm happy to take questions or get into any of the more of the weeds of this, so to speak.
I don't know if Justice plagiarized the Declaration of Independence. I do know that study philosophy like I did, read Locke's Second Treatise of Government, and near the end of that, he's talking about how government should be, and Jefferson absolutely read that and used that as a model for it, because it was a big deal to say, we're not going to have monarchy anymore, we're going to have something else. And what the United States of America is, the great thing about it is it's something else. And he said, if you Declaration of Independence, but, you know, we're not breaking away from England for like transitory reasons, but this king, King George, has committed a long train of abuses. That phrase, long train of abuses, is lifted right out of the box. I mean, those 4 words exist in that order. Now, is that plagiarism or is that what people did? This thing about ought to be, my rights ought to be, is in the Mecklenburg, is in the National
Right.
Declaration. It is also in, like, Terry Lee's
And 5 other
and 5
resolutions.
other things, so it doesn't mean that there's plagiarism
Right.
necessarily. But, so I don't know whether it's solved or not. I don't know.
Well, no, and no one does, right? So, and that leaves it in an interesting side story of this, which is really good. The only testimony about who Jack saw in Philadelphia is from Captain Jack, right? And he says he met with 2 of the Carolina representatives, not 3, but 2. And the 2 he met with were William Hooper, I believe, and I believe it was Caswell and Hughes. And after the Revolutionary War period, when Jefferson and Adams were debating this, Jefferson, in his letter to Adams, says, "You remember as well as I did, there was no greater Tory in Congress than Hughes," which is also set off the North Carolinians, right? And that Hooper was vacillating back and forth on whether he wanted the Declaration of Independence even as late as July 4th, 1776. So imagine if you have this messenger from the frontiers of North Carolina writing up there saying, "Hey, we're starting the Civil War now," right? To those people who were temperamentally Tories at the time, and maybe even later, they would have said, like all politicians who troublesome constituents, they would have said, "Oh, that's great. We really appreciate you. Thanks so much for coming," and send him home, right? We'll take this under advisement. Thanks. We really appreciate your effort. And that's the most logical explanation of what happened. You don't have to go down a rabbit hole of Jefferson saw it and covered it up. Now, and that being said, that's what Adams thought. Now, he was an emotional character and really didn't like Jefferson, so that set him off. But there is another side story on the Jefferson bit, which is also very interesting, which is, so when I quoted earlier the letter from the governor, Josiah Martin, to the Lord Dartmouth, he says, "The resolves of the committee in Mecklenburg, which your lordship will find in this enclosed newspaper, surpass all the ordinaries or publications before they're right, okay." So, in the 1830s, they said, "Where's the newspaper? Let's go find the newspaper." Right? The newspaper was sent to us one way or the other. We got the letter, where's the newspaper? So, President Polk sent over, who was very vested in the story, because one of his descendants, or one of his ancestors rather, is Thomas Polk, was a principal participant in this. So he sent over his story to Britain and said, "Go find the newspaper." So he does. He goes to the British Reporter's office, and they produce the file, and they have the letter from Josiah Martin, and it's called Dispatch 34, or maybe it's 43, doesn't matter. One of the dispatches, but it's a numbered dispatch from the royal governor to his superiors in London. And so the letter's there, and on the back of the letter is a sort of sticky note that says, "Newspaper removed at the request of Mr. Stevenson," and it's dated. Well, who's got the newspaper? So, who's Stevenson? Stevenson's the U.S. ambassador to Great Britain. Stevenson is from Virginia. Stevenson is a friend and colleague of Thomas Jefferson's. So Stevenson, without any debate, has the paper removed, and it's never seen again. And you can go see the paper with that annotation to this day, because a friend of mine did this. And so at a minimum, you have gross negligence in removing an historical artifact, right, that's never seen again. Well, isn't that suspicious, right? Or you can say, this is deliberate. This is the first governmental cover-up. You destroyed the paper because it was in there, and it implicated Jefferson, right? That's a plausible reading of the facts, right? Stevenson, meanwhile, just to circle back on this, then returns after being U.S. ambassador and becomes president of the UVA, Jefferson's University. What does that mean? You tell me.
You said it was so ripe for revolution.
All of the colonies were sort of ripe for the revolution, I would say, but the people that lived in that specific area were very anti-English and had a history of that, were very, as the Scott Syfert Presbyterian of a very militant strain. There was a revolutionary preacher called Alexander Erwin who had been expelled from Virginia and expelled from the Presbyterian church for being too militant for the Presbyterians. And he was sort of on the British list as leading reactionary rebel. And he brought his congregation down to Mecklenburg County so he could live on the creeks there and live in the woods. So these people were in this area too, all throughout sort of the Piedmont and sort of northern South Carolina, called the New Acquisition District, were extremely anti-British. They were anti-Anglican Church specifically. So when the British come in the Southern campaigns, you really have almost a religious war of the Presbyterians against the Anglican British, are perceived as such. And we know this because after the war, in any of the British records or papers, for example, Bannister Charlton's memoirs, who was a British cavalry officer here for 2 years in Charlotte briefly, has a great quote. He said, "It had been frequently mentioned to the king's officers and was evident that the counties of Mecklenburg and Rouen were more hostile to England than any other in America." And you got a letter from Cornwallis similarly saying that these counties, Mecklenburg specifically, are more inveterate than any county I've been in the Americas, including the Jerseys. So again, what does that prove? I don't know, but it to answer your question, it tells you about the mentality of the people who lived here.
A lot of that hostility could carry over.
100%. Oh, it absolutely did. It absolutely did. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I heard Cornwallis dubbed Charlotte as the hornet nest of Carolinas.
Correct. And specifically, damned hornet's nest of rebellion.
So that's why the police, Charlotte police wear the hornet nest on there.
Correct.
They have a badge.
Yeah, the police badge in Charlotte is in the shape of a hornet's nest. It's on a county seal. And the Charlotte Hornets basketball all have that. Come from that common background.
Just a question of the plaque that says, I think it's the signers of the Mecklenburg.
Right.
Okay. Means sign a document, correct?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay, well, all right, if that's the case.
It depends on who you ask.
Yeah, maybe the case what I'm gonna ask you, but I'm sure all those signers, families, live years after. And somebody has bound to vetted everybody to find somewhere. Don't we, I mean,
It has to be.
I mean, the Avery family, we don't, Mary Lou and she lives in Wason Home Place.
If y'all could just find it.
We did, and under the floors, they had the floors done on, and nothing, not that, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and again, the whole area was laid to waste.
Yeah.
Like, the British occupied it and burned all the houses to the ground, so people fled. And you got papers lying around in one cabinets. Like a last 3 years. They just won't.
But those men were, I don't know, all about it, quality people, like whatever it is. They, surely, if they signed something like that, they would have remembered.
Yeah. So not to be snide, so it isn't clear if they signed anything or not.
Right, I understand
specifically.
that, yeah.
That's sort of the tradition now, but
Yeah.
the actual testimony is they resolved or passed on something. So maybe they signed it, maybe they don't. We'll never really know.
Scott, just to close the circle, maybe somebody has a question. How come we've got a written out copy of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, when you say it was burned in fire, explain how that got recreated? And all the consistency of that.
So the paperwork on this whole story is extraordinarily complicated, and I won't bore you with it. But as I say, there are a number of papers that exist. There's sort of what's called the rough notes of John Maynard Alexander, and they're sort of ripped in half, and they're marked up. And you've got the Davy copy that John Maynard copied at some point from something, but from what we don't know. He gave it to William R. Davy, the cavalry officer, and again, when they went to look for it, his kids ripped it in half, and Davy was dead. So So they found it, mixed with all these other papers. And when they find the paper, the sort of foundational story paper that gets printed and Adams sees, it's rolled up with a series of Revolutionary War pamphlets dated 1776 in the surviving house of John Alexander. The other house burned down, but another outhouse or outbuilding did not. So they find this, but no one knows where it came from, right? It's undated, it's anonymous. We've looked at the handwriting, it's not Magnet's, nobody can ever read it or conclusively. So if you're a skeptic, you're like, how do we prove the provenance of this paper? Like, where did it come from? And we just can't answer that as much as we try, which is part of the frustrating but fun part of this whole wacky detective story.
So if it's a hung jury and there's no concrete documentation that's dated, how did it end up on the North Carolina file? That date?
Because they wanted to put it there. I mean, simple as that. Because, again, if you want to be very particular and scrupulous about the evidence, you say, well, which is a bit to be pedantic too. Unless you produce a paper, it didn't happen. You have to discount so much other things, including 13 eyewitnesses and very detailed testimony about what went on, right? And I didn't go through all the evidentiary stuff here, because I didn't know if you want to hear that or not. But there's all this other circumstantial evidence that floats around the British papers, which I mentioned. You have a poem given by a school kid at his graduation in 1801 talking about Mecklenburg, the first people to declare independence. You have toasts that we found in the last 10 years published in the papers in 1802 and 1803, where the Revolutionary War veterans would meet at the Presbyterian Church downtown, and they'd all wear badges that say May 75, and they'd give toasts, and the paper would read all the toasts down. And they drank a lot, because there's like 40 toasts. But there's like Thomas Jefferson, our new president, to the Secretary of the Navy, to Aaron Burr, to so and so and so. And then the 13th toast is to the citizens of Mecklenburg, the first to declare independence of May of 1775. Well, what's that? That's evidence, right? That's pretty good evidence. The other really good evidentiary one, which is found in the early 20th century, at which point no one's really paying attention to this anyway, so it kind of just gets lost in the shuffle, was the Moravian journals from Winston-Salem are published. And they're all written in German, and a scholar goes back and finds them all. There's a Moravian settlement called Wachovia, from the Wachau Valley of Czechoslovakia, but the Moravians lived there, and they had very well-tilled fields and were trading, were completely neutral in the war, like they're like leave us alone. Very orderly, like the British and the Americans would all comment about how the Moravians were the loveliest people. But they kept very scrupulous diaries. Like today, Brother John was assaulted by some Indians at the crossroads, and yesterday it rained a lot. We're having trouble growing the watermelons and so forth, but the peas are doing really well. Oh, we should also put down for the record that in May or June of 1775, the counties of Mecklenburg declared themselves independent, declared themselves free and independent. I'll come back to this. Free and independent of Great Britain, and sent a messenger to Congress, but Congress thought this was premature. Next week, we think it may rain too. You're like, whoop. So, and all this is written in German, except for the words free and independent, which they write in English. Well, why would you switch from German to English? Unless you're trying to write the most literal translation of what you're hearing in the community. And these are also uncontested pieces of evidence, right? So you have a lot of things like that that get people very excited. Again, people are so entrenched, to the degree anybody cares at all, frankly, but to the degree they do, people are so entrenched on their positions on this anyway, that if we found a copy next week, I don't think you change this behavior. Honestly, I don't think you would.
What was the geography of the group which was declaring independence at this point? In Philadelphia, I know the geography of the East Coast of the people who were declaring independence. In the state of Franklin over in Tennessee, I have some idea what their geography is when they declared independence. What was the specific geography that the Mecklenburg Declaration was declaring was in fact independent?
It was the county itself, which obviously was a bigger county.
Much well, it exists.
Oh, yeah, it existed. Yeah.
Mecklenburg,
Anson did not exist. I think it was Anson did not yet exist.
Answer is most
Yeah.
So there was a specific government.
Oh, 100%. It was a county of Mecklenburg since like 1762, let's say, something like that. But it was much larger, it kind of went west. But not all of the people that participated were necessarily from that specific county. You had some Pfeiffer, who's a German Lutheran who lived in what's now West Concord, that strictly speaking outside the boundaries. I don't know if Wade still lived in the county or not. He might have. Maybe he's a lawyer, so maybe
He was living with Feds God.
he was living, that's
He
exactly.
was actually living with Feds God.
Yeah.
Make
So he was a William Cannon, who was one of the three people that everyone says wrote the document, was a lawyer from Salisbury. So you probably had some, it wasn't strictly speaking the county, but some of the other settlements around the county.
Was there a governing entity at that point for the area that was involved?
You have the Colonial Assembly in Hillsborough, right? But everyone sort of governed themselves, right? The British were far away, so everyone were magistrates and doing their own thing.
The delegates of this meeting, will they not, just two of them are listed on.
Yes,
If you go to this meeting on May 19th,
that's right.
and that's basically.
So they didn't say.
It was the militia. It was militia, yeah, that's.
Militia districts, those companies were in the geographic area, not militia, as in, the militia districts were geographic, like counties are today.
And what also happened as, after this in August and September, was they established a military tribunal, and they expelled people that they thought were Tories from the area. They sent them to Camden or Charleston, and all that's authenticated, so
At
that,
this point, that particular declaration didn't involve any other counties.
yeah,
Just Mecklenburg County and Mecklenburg.
correct. Yep, that's it.
Thank you very much.
How much influence did the committees of safety have in Mecklenburg at the time?
Quite, so how much influence the committee of safety had? Afterwards, quite a bit. So it really was governed by martial law for the next 5 years. And you had two, analysis in the record, you've got these two lawyers in Salisbury, and one of them had a dog called Tory, true story. And they seized him and expelled them both, because they wrote all these letters to the governor saying to stop being mistreated and so forth. And, the records to say they established, they made everybody carry a certificate from the committee as to whether your political loyalties were correct in order to travel. And some of those still exist. But yeah, they ruled in probably most of the areas around, that's when, particularly Mecklenburg, was more or less this area for the year, I think. That they were ruled by, committees of safety under different names. And it was martial law. And if they could seize your house if you were a loyalist, or perceived to be a loyalist, you might get a trial, you might just be told to leave. And they got really ugly in 1780 when it looked like the British were on the way to winning, and it was just a bloodbath. And Civil War, and everything's burning other people's homes down, people being murdered, and so forth.
I think the bottom line is Virginia or anywhere north of Virginia could not stand North Carolina. And that's the bottom line.
That's it.
Ask people in the South what was the turning point of the revolution, it's Kings Mountain. Ask them in the North what was the turning point of the revolution, Saratoga.
Or Yorktown.
And Yorktown was in, Saratoga was the turning point in your northern states, Kings Mountain, southern states, and those two ideas will do like that.
Well, I'll tell you a quick, brief, fun story too. So there's a very good book that came out, not just mine, but there's another very good book that came out of this called Who's Your Founding Father? By a writer from, he's actually a sports writer for Sports Illustrated and for USA Magazine. And he went down a rabbit hole with story about 4 years ago. Just moved, not from North Carolina, moved down from I forget where. And just was like, this is insane. This is the most interesting thing I've ever heard. How do I know about this? So he wrote a hilariously funny book about him just discovering this whole story for himself. And I highly recommend it. You read it a weekend. The history is very good because he took it off from me. But it is a very funny and well-written book. But the point is, we talk about this all the time. In Charlotte or around there, you do get a great amount of interest, but you have some degree of apathy. And we get a lot of degree of resistance or hostility in North Carolina to the story, where he goes and gives speeches in Richmond or Charlottesville, and these 500 people show up and they don't like this. Like, they don't have any built-in assumptions about us. They read it and they're like, this is amazing, right? So, or New York. But for some reason, you know, it's like driving with a parking brake on in North Carolina on this sometimes. It's maddening. That's life. Anybody else? Awesome. Right?
But that was excellent, and we think they can give it even more, but I think it existed. That's my vote. So, I think North Carolina. How about that?
Another comment.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for coming. Oh, I said now. Scott, if I could have you come up here and say about this, but make it very official. We have a certificate of appreciation, especially after opening class. And we're going to have a little photo here. And we've also challenged the leader of our chapter. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. With that, any other, just one note on the reverse side, a list of our past events and future upcoming events. I tried to put a name out to the, I guess it would be right there if you're interested in any of them. And Eric mentioned that we have Living History this coming Saturday in 2 days. But take a look at those and join us for any that look interesting, and I assure you they're all interesting, but I know it's a lot of time, so thanks for your consideration on that. Well, with that, we will wrap up the meeting, and if I can get everyone to stand, please. We will do the recessional, and Tom Lesser will lead us.
Until we meet again, let us remember our obligations to our forefathers. Who gave us our Constitution, Bill of Rights, and independent Supreme Court, and a nation of free men
and women. We didn't officially put that in as a request, so we'll see where that goes. Well, thank you all for coming again, and it's great to see you all, and we hope to see you back at future meetings.